My name is Savannah Soliday. I'm a double major with criminal justice and Arabic, which is why I picked this topic, women's rights in Saudi Arabia, which I know is unfortunately hard to hear those two words or those two phrases put together. But we are going to talk about what rights women have and how they've gradually gotten them over the years. So, to start out with some history, in 1955, the first school for women opened up, and then jump 15 years later, the first university for women opened. Then in 2001, women were allowed to get personal ID cards with the permission of their male guardian, and it was not issued to the woman, it was issued to that guardian. In 2005, women were not forced into marriages anymore. And then in 2009, the first female government minister, and then in 2012, women were allowed to compete in the Olympic Games. And then to continue history, in 2013, women were allowed to ride bicycles, motorcycles only in recreational areas and with their male guardian present and a full Islamic body covering. Then in 2015, women could run for office as well as vote. This resulted in 20 women being elected into municipal roles in the monarchy. Then in 2018, women could go to sports stadiums and drive without permission from their guardian and can drive all by themselves. Then 1 year later, in 2019, if a woman got divorced, they were allowed to receive text messages from other men and they could obtain travel or passports as well as travel with less restrictions and without permission of their male guardian. And when I say less restrictions, less of the amount that they have. They still have a lot of restrictions on where they can travel, unfortunately. Also in 2019, women do not need permission in the hiring process, and the minimum age for marriage was set at 18. But don't be fooled because with court approval, girls 15 to 18 can still get married. So I apologize for my butchering of this name, but Abdulrahman Al Sadahan is 37 years old and he's an aid worker. So he was sentenced to 20 years in prison as well as a 20-year travel ban after that for peacefully protesting and fighting for women's rights. The way that it was covered up by the government was he was charged with funding and advocating for terrorism when he was really just a peaceful activist. Muhammad Al Rabia. He is a human rights activist and was also arrested. He was arrested around the time of many arrests were happening for people fighting against male guardianship and for women's rights. He was charged on vague grounds, which, like I said previously, was most likely covered up by charging him with terrorism or something that wouldn't be questioned in the court of law. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, even though prosecution was pushing for 25 years for fighting for women's rights. While in prison, he was tortured by waterboarding and electric shock. Salma Al Shahab, she is a PhD student, a mother of two young children, and was sentenced to 34 years in prison for supporting dissidents on Twitter. She was considered to assist public unrest and damage civil and national security by following and retweeting certain tweets and accounts, as well as tweeting her own specific things to help get awareness of the lack of rights of women in Saudi Arabia. So now we come to the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. So he is responsible for many of the new rights for females. So he ended the mandatory gender segregation in public places, as in restaurants and cinemas, as like movie theaters, where men and women could mingle. He also loosened the amount of control a male guardian has over females and passed a law that women can drive, which allows them to enter the workforce. But there are many issues with these new regulations, unfortunately. So you would think every woman could benefit from these new regulations, but unfortunately, it's only certain women. If a woman is born into a family of free thinkers and evolved men, then they can absolutely take advantage of these new changes and these new laws. But if a woman's husband or father, their male guardian, does not think they should drive or mingle at these restaurants or enter the workforce, they are expected and must obey his wishes, unfortunately. So these changes do not legally force men to let go of their extreme control that they have over women of their household. And unfortunately, the USA has not found a peaceful way to support human rights abroad, especially in the Middle East. So some things that have not changed for women still need permission to get married. They are not allowed to withhold themselves from their husband. They must breastfeed their children. And what really rattles my mind is widows are entitled to less of the late spouse's estate than a widower. So, conflictions in the mind of a woman who lives over in Saudi Arabia. So, the reasons to flee, there are many that I've already listed, but here are a couple more. Restrictions on where they can travel, domestic violence that they can't escape, discrimination in employment and healthcare, as well as inequality in divorce, child custody, and inheritance. Just like how I said, widowers are entitled to more than widows in of their late spouse's estate. But so they have these reasons to flee going through their mind. But then we come over to if they get caught. So if these women get caught fleeing Saudi Arabia, they are pressured to return home, as well as arrested and or placed into restrictive centers, or could even face death. So it's a big risk that they're taking if they flee. And here's a woman who took that risk. So her name is Rahaf Muhammad Al Quinn. 18 years old, she fled to Canada to be free of this male guardian. She has zero contact with her family, which she feels better that way. And I don't blame her. And now, as a women's rights activist, um, obviously for women like her, she's free to make her own decisions, and she wants that for every other woman who had to experience what she did. So here are two women as well. These are their aliases because whenever they fled, they didn't want anybody to know who they were. So they were given the names Reem and Rawan. They fled Saudi Arabia at the ages of 18 and 20, and they were granted emergency humanitarian visas to escape to Australia. But unfortunately, while traveling through Hong Kong, they got flagged. So at that point, they went into hiding. And from the research that I've done, I hear that they are now safe and free in an undisclosed location. They described their situation as if it was jail. And one of the quotes that I found was, "Our rooms were the prison cells, and our fathers and brothers were the prison keepers." So this is my works cited, and I just wish there was more that we could do to help these women in Saudi Arabia who are dealing with this male guardianship and lack of rights.